Hello, class. Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at a chart of different right-wing factions that have all, come together under a coalition. Whenever you have a coalition of any kind in politics, there's going to be different, fractures within that coalition that don't necessarily agree with each other, but are sometimes united against a common enemy, maybe the woke left, maybe commies, Trump is the main guy who is uniting this coalition, and he's in the middle, and we're going to look at all the different subsections of this coalition that he's brought underneath himself. And it's interesting to do this because we can start to see some of the possible fractures that could emerge in the coalition. And this also explains some of the fractures we've seen already, like the H-1B visa right-wing infighting drama, and, of course, the Elon Trump right-wing infighting drama. So, we're going to look at this through the lens of ideology, and then near the end of this video, we'll talk a little bit more about seeing things through this lens. But, yeah, let's start with Trump. So around every ideology here, I have someone that represents the ideology. But Trump is an interesting case. I put around him like populist, national conservatism. He is all these things, but I don't think he's probably the least ideological person here, and that is what makes him such a great conduit for bringing all these right-wing factions together, is because he's not, you can say, oh, Trump is a fascist or whatever, but I don't think he's sitting down reading the Doctrines of Fascism thinking, great book. I don't think he's not very autistic. He's not ideological in that way. He's more of a schizo. He's all over the place. I call him a meta-ironic schizo here because he sort of is in a position where he needs to speak out of both ends of his mouth simultaneously. The tariffs are simultaneously just a free market deal to get better free market deals, but also protectionist and nationalist and kind of in a way like anti-capitalist in a strange way for a right-wing coalition leader. And he's doing this because he has to appeal to this faction over here, the side of capital, and also this faction over here, which is the side of autarky, and it's the more fascism, authoritarian end of the spectrum, to appeal to, both the libertarian right and the authoritarian center of his coalition. So let's start up here. Let's start with autarky. This is a faction of the Trump administration that deals in economic nationalism and is pushing him towards the tariffs and stuff. Bannon is a good example of this. Steve Bannon was the chief strategist of the first Trump administration, the 2016 one. And I labeled him here as post-racial fascism. And I'll let my good friend Richard Hanna explain the post-racial fascism of Steve Bannon. So, yes, as you can see, Steve Bannon is simultaneously woke, which is to say he, thinks about the interests of ethnic minorities, and sort of authoritarian, fascist, economic nationalist, wants to pull out of the global economy, rants about the globalists, his main enemy is the globalists. He's not racist. I think that's fair to say. Steve Bannon, maybe if he was racist, he wouldn't be getting platformed on the big MSM media stuff, but so I've contrasted him here, and I'm trying in this chart just to use people who are actually a part of the Trump administration. I have Ye and Fuentes here. They're not a part of the Trump administration. They're associated. They got dinner with Trump and stuff, but they're not associated. They don't have any role in the Trump administration. But I put them there just to contrast with the Bannon approach, because that is more of a racial fascism. That is I am concerned about the white minority in the United States sort of fascism, where Bannon, Bannon's never going to be like, oh, we should replace white people, but he's also not going to. He's not concerned with that in the same way that the more racial fascist types are. I also put Christian nationalism in here. I think maybe Candace Owens is a more sincere, non-white genocide kind of Christian nationalist, but at the same time, it's hard to tell. We're splitting hairs over here. But in general, these people are not just blindly on the side of capital. I'm sure they hate commies, but they're really more on the side of nationalism and kind of crippling capital in the way where nationalism can work for the American people, even if it's not necessarily in the interest of the free market. Now we're gonna get to this guy later, but Curtis Yarvin, he says that fascism is an anti-capitalist reaction. This is very interesting, right? Because what you'll hear from Marxists and left-wingers is fascism is a capitalist movement. It's actually what happens when neoliberalism fails is the forces of capital flee towards fascism. So fascism is kind of a right-wing pro-capitalist movement. You know, Hitler privatized a lot of stuff, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's a fair point to be made, but I think I actually do kind of agree with Curtis Yarvin more on this point that fascism is a kind of anti-capitalist movement. It's an anti-globalist movement. It's an anti-global capitalist movement. And the forces of capital over here, which is going to be represented by Elon Musk, and we'll get to him soon. The forces of capital over here do not want nationalism. It's not in their best interest. Maybe Elon will tweet about how we need stronger borders or whatever, but ultimately the libertarian class, the capital class, for the most part, they want to do what is in the interest of their companies and their capital, and almost always it's in the interest of their companies and capital to be globalist and to trade as much as possible with as many people as possible on a global scale. So, moving over here to the capital class, this is another faction of the right-wing, coalition that Trump has to keep happy, and you got libertarians like Rand Paul. This is an easy fracture you can look at. Rand Paul was critical of the big beautiful bill that added $36 trillion or whatever, and you can go even further here and include ANCAPs. I put Michael Malice here, but Elon. Elon is really more the autist to Trump's schizo. He genuinely thinks he's some kind of free speech, ascended centrist, libertarian dude, and genuinely cares about the national debt, which I thought no one cared about that shit. Even if the Republicans are adding $36 trillion to the debt, you got to be like, wow, there really is no way of cutting the debt between the Democrats and the Republicans. So Elon really is more of the autist here. He is more of a principled kind of, I think the debt should go down kind of guy, and thought that the bills that Trump was passing and the nationalism that he was doing, and sort of like, Bannon in some ways agrees with Bernie Sanders on a lot of regards. I think this is the core split within the administration, the autarky versus the side of capital. Because, on the side of capital, you want to be cutting the deficit and you want to be getting the government out of people's lives. Over here, you're like, we need to give money to white babies or whatever. Like, white babies or American babies, depending on what flavor you're going with. But, yeah, that's the core tension, and he's trying to keep both of these sides happy. Curtis Yarvin, I put over here as the court philosopher, the Jafar type of the Trump administration. Who knows how much, if any, influence he has over Trump, but he is definitely connected to Vance and Peter Thiel. And Vance obviously being the vice president in this world of capital and in this sort of techno-feudal, techno-monarch world. Curtis Yarvin's a very interesting character. I'm sure you've heard of him before. I put him down as neo-feudal, neo-reactionary, neo-monarchist. He's also a neo-cameralist, lots of neos in here. He's like a right accelerationist. He invented the Dark Enlightenment with Nick Land. And his whole thing is he thinks that Trump should be a king. Trump should be a monarch. I wouldn't say that's his whole thing. He'll often say, oh, Trump maybe isn't the guy to do it. But he basically thinks that he's an advocate for monarchy, and he thinks that America should be in a monarchy. It's a more efficient way of doing things. And a lot of the moves that Trump is making right now, like destroying some of the executive branches, going through the courts, concentrating power within a singular unit, is the kind of thing that Curtis Yarvin would advocate for. Now, Curtis Yarvin, if he was talking to a progressive, would say some shit like, well, Bernie Sanders should be able to do the same thing, right? Because, if Bernie Sanders was president, he wouldn't be able to make universal health care happen without going through the courts and doing a bunch of unconstitutional things. So really, it's in everyone's best interest to have an efficient monarch. Now, in no way am I suggesting here that Trump is trying to keep Curtis Yarvin happy, but he is a member of this coalition. He's got direct influence in the the EAC world, and the Elon world, the Vance world, the techno monarch world, the tech world in general. He is very influential, and so he's kind of like 2 stages removed. So again, this is the main tension. But I'm going to look at a couple other tensions here. So one of the tensions is hawk, and one of the tensions is non-interventionism. So when we're looking at a foreign interference, like a foreign diplomatic relation chart, you have Dove on one side, hawk on the other side. A Dove approach is stuff like USAID, where you go into other countries and you give them aid, and it's a sort of a benevolent approach. You help them with their with their country, especially poorer countries. A hawk approach is more like, I'm going to coup the democratically elected leader and replace them with a U.S. asset. So Pete Hegseth here is the defense secretary, and I've labeled him as the hawk. He's a good representative of the hawkish faction, very pro-spending money on the endless wars, pro-Israel, pro-Ukraine, I'm sure. And then on the other end, we've got the non-interventionist Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is the director of national intelligence, and she ran her whole thing on being anti-war. She's the anti-war candidate. She doesn't want any more wars. So Trump often markets himself as the anti-war candidate and non-interventionist, but blows up, Soleimani and will often, get involved with foreign war stuff. So he again has to be this character appealing to both sides simultaneously with meta irony. He's literally me. So the non-interventionist types and the hawkish types, you may notice there's no Dove faction of the Trump administration. That's because they are not represented. There's no Dove faction of this right-wing administration. Being Dove is more associated with like being neoliberal, center-left globalist, and Trump does not have that represented in his faction, as far as I know. So really, it's just a matter of like, I don't want to get involved at all. Let Hitler do his things in Europe. That's not our problem. America first. Versus, let's coup the South American democratically elected president and replace him with a right-wing fascist loyal to America. Those are your options under the Trump administration. So yeah, obviously though, these two sides don't agree with each other. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want any involvement with foreign wars, and Pete Hegseth is like, all right, let's go bomb some children, or terrorists. So the last section we're going to look at here is what I call alt health neo crunchy. These are people who, by all accounts, are like libertarian left in a lot of ways, but they're in the Trump administration. This is kind of a political compass. Like, it's kind of. Well, if this was a political compass, I would have swapped the hawk and the non-interventionist one. But these guys, I'm using RFK as the emblematic sort of unifier here. Maha, Make America Healthy Again. This is his ideology, and also in this box, I'm putting Marjorie Taylor Greene as conspiracism. This is a administration that is like catnip to conspiracy people, and MTG is sort of like the most emblematic of that faction. It's interesting to have conspiracists as part of your faction when you're in power, because their whole ideology is based off of being like suspicious of people in power. And so what that means is they get a lot of like, okay, let's focus on the last people who are in power. And basically all of these people have their own agendas and don't want to go off in their own direction. But like Kash Patel was saying when he was on Joe Rogan and the Elon Musk tweet dropped that, Trump's in the Epstein files, Kash Patel says, that's not my lane, and that's kind of very emblematic of what it is like to be a part of this right-wing coalition, which is like, okay, that's not my lane. Maybe in RFK's heart of hearts, he doesn't like that Trump is scarfing down the McDonald's. And then he takes this picture where he looks like he's going to fucking die because, he's being forced to eat a McDonald's like a humiliation ritual. But, he knows his lane, and his lane is, go into the health secretary services and get rid of the Red 40 or whatever you want to get rid of. And that's kind of what you're there for. And so, this segment is, I'm sure, completely against a lot of the people that support Trump, that like their, unhealthy food and their processed food, and they want to keep eating it. But RFK is there to sort of bolster the vaccine skeptic people. I mean, this kind of whole area is post-COVID, like all the hippies turned right-wing. Every hippie is like right-wing now. All the alt-health stuff, it used to be like left-wing, crazy granola people, anti-vaccine people were like left-wing libertarians. Now they're like right-wing. Now they've all been gobbled up under the right-wing coalition. So I've also got someone like Russell Brand in here, no relation to the Trump administration, but just kind of like vibes-wise. And then connecting the alt-health neo-crunchy people with the anti-globalist people, you got like Alex Jones selling his brain pills and ranting about globalists. So this is the chart that I've drawn out, and with someone to represent each individual person in the administration to represent that coalition of the faction. But let's take a look here and think about what we might have been missing. And what we're missing here is the fact that this isn't how the world works. Ideological rifts like this are interesting to look at from the ideological perspective, but the man in the middle here is not really an ideological person. He's like an egoist and he's an authoritarian, sure, but he's much more of like he's driven by his ego. So. And you could say the same about all these people. Like, these are all just human beings. So when Elon and Trump are fighting, yeah, there's the ideological element of autarky versus capital, of the H-1B visa versus, like, no H-1B visa people, which, by the way, Bernie Sanders was on the side of no H-1B visa, which would, align with Bannon. That's interesting to look at like that, but, ultimately, this is kind of just like, maybe Elon and Trump just didn't like each other. Maybe Elon was going in and annoying Trump, and maybe Trump was annoying Elon, and there's just some personal drama there, and this guy's high on ketamine, and none of this has anything to do with ideology, right? So when Trump is saying to Netanyahu like maybe we should help the people of Gaza more, and I don't like you very much, and does all these deals behind his back. Is it because the non-interventionist wing of the right-wing coalition got to Trump and is starting to influence him, to be pro-Palestine? Or perhaps is it just the fact that, Netanyahu personally wronged this guy? So I think this is something that, you do kind of underestimate when it comes to this kind of stuff. We underestimate just how much this kind of the interpersonal relationships get in the way of these kinds of relationships, and most of this stuff is just, a guy got pissed off, and that's it. The dude got pissed off. That's all that happened. So, yeah, a lot of these fractures are just interpersonal relationships, and there's not like an inherent weakness of viewing things ideologically, but it sure is fun because you can make a chart.